We are sponsorships of lots of different organizations. So whether it's the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy, the National Center of Philanthropy, Stanford University, all these different organizations, Vanguard Charitable, Fidelity Charitable, we all work collectively in the industry to financially support giving in the U.S. You literally can make any grant, any gift, any charity that's a registered 501c3 with the IRS. As we all know, there's hundreds of billions of dollars that are transferring from the baby boomers and have started, and 2/3 of that's in the charitable giving space. So whether it's private foundations, endowments, trust accounts, donor advised fund accounts, all the different vehicles.
Today, I want to talk about where the intersection of health, wealth, and time bring about more charitable giving. If we're going to talk about charitable giving, we got to talk about donor advised funds. And so I wanted to bring on Chris Boyce. Chris is our consultant with Schwab Charitable. He's a senior charitable consultant at Schwab. And Chris comes to us from Chicago today to talk everything about donor advised funds and the trends in charitable giving. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Good morning, John, and welcome everybody. Thanks for having me.
You bet. With that, let's start with that big question. When we talk to clients, half the time what we're seeing is we have to really shift the conversation away from giving money later in life, especially at death, to something about giving money sooner. And that's where guys like you come in. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what are the current trends in charitable giving that you're seeing?
Yeah, great, John. And that's a great way to kick off the conversation. So good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Chris Boyce, Senior Manager at Schwab Charitable. I think, John, when we look at the key trends impacting the philanthropic space, we sit pretty uniquely inside of all the wealth advisor relationships. As you know, we're the charitable division of Charles Schwab and Company. And so some of the key trends that we're seeing. So first of all, as we all know, there's hundreds of billions of dollars that are transferring from the baby boomers and have started, and 2/3 of that's in the charitable giving space. So whether it's private foundations, endowments, trust accounts, donor advised fund accounts, all the different vehicles. Number two, more and more baby boomers and next gen are looking at strongly what are the pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages of maybe that grandparent's small private foundation. And where they're landing through your help and now the industry's help is that the attributes, the main features, benefits of the charitable giving account, also known as the donor advised fund account, become very compelling. So the first trend that we've seen over the last several years, and the industry's expecting will continue, is that folks are closing and dissolving their private foundation. For instance, $1, $2, $3, $4, $5, $10 million. Number two, the second big trend is, especially over the last 5 or 10 or 15 years, people build private businesses and they sell them. They build private businesses and they sell them. And so there's these big liquidity events. And especially with mass affluent, high net worth, and ultra high net worth families, a lot of it's landing with independent wealth advisory firms like your enterprise and others that we work with. And again, they're landing at, it probably doesn't make sense to open up a small private foundation for the benefits of the donor advised fund account. And so we have resources, we have tools, we have attorneys that can get into that conversation through you with those high net worth families. The third thing that we actively participate in is that we are sponsorships of lots of different organizations. So whether it's the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy, the National Center of Philanthropy, Stanford University, all these different organizations, Vanguard Charitable, Fidelity Charitable, we all work collectively in the industry to financially support giving in the U.S. And the next gen is the next big trend, John. So the way that maybe Grandpa and Grandma gave, and Grandpa and Grandma had a small private foundation, baby boomers, but now next gen. And it's the term G2, G3, G4. We actually did a study this spring with Stanford University and the Lilly School of Philanthropy, and you could provide it to your listeners. But at a high level, it talks about the next gen. My daughters, for instance, are going to give a lot differently than maybe my spouse and I, and it's different than grandparents. So whether it's where the industry is heading with the next gen, and all the big liquidity events as far as selling private businesses and the trends about folks dissolving private foundations. They're landing at a very compelling donor advised fund account as a key solution in that space.
When you talk about it, sometimes it sounds like it's just for rich people. But the reality is what we're seeing, especially with our clients, is that just about anyone can do it because the donor advised fund allows them to have a tax impact today, but give the money away later. So if you could do two things for me: one, unpack what the donor advised fund is and how it works. And then two, how are you seeing just normal people that want to give a little bit to their church every year give money into the donor advised fund to be used later?
Absolutely. That's the first big misnomer. So if we have about 127,000 open and active giving accounts, donor advised fund accounts, most of them are small balance accounts. In fact, at Schwab Charitable, we have no annual fee. We have no minimum account size. You could open up an account for literally $50. Now, nobody does that. I might be a good example, right? So as folks accumulate brokerage assets, as they accumulate certain assets, if they're philanthropic, you could give to a church. You could tithe to a church. You could use a credit card to help pay for some 501k or some 5K that somebody's doing. But instead, advisors and clients are realizing it's a little bit more tax smart philanthropy to use some of my low cost basis brokerage account assets or cash and fund the donor advised fund account. And a lot of folks do it for $1,000 or $3,000 a year. Yeah, we have some really large accounts, but if we have 127,000 open and active accounts, the average account $25,000 to $30,000 to $40,000. So people fund this account, and then they can give to any 501c3 organization that's registered with the IRS. So to unpack it a little bit, these accounts are just like a brokerage account, as you know, John. So they're opened up online. They're part of the brokerage back office system. There's a wonderful digital mobile app. So if I'm traveling, if my spouse and I go to a charity event and I want to look at my balance, I actually want to send $100 to that food pantry because we went to a charity event this weekend. Click, 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 go into the mobile app and send the money to the charity. So the main reasons why these are so popular is that people can fund the account, and let's just say there's $1,000 in there this year. The first big thing is you don't have to give the money away right away. So the Internal Revenue Service governs these accounts. Number two, Schwab and Fidelity, we offer mutual funds. So any assets that are contributed to the donor advised fund account, now I actually can elect to have that money grow tax-free into the future. Third, all the clients do succession planning on it. So just like I might have all of our assets, whether it's retirement accounts or brokerage accounts or bank accounts, everything could be split between my spouse and I. Then eventually when maybe that original couple pass away, folks do customized succession planning on these accounts because a lot of these accounts, there might be a balance left over 20 or 30 or 40 years from now. And then the last thing why people love it, and it's so easy, is that you literally can make any grant, any gift, any charity that's a registered 501c3 with the IRS. So for instance, our organization, we don't police or influence what charities I want to give to as the donor. Conservative, liberal, controversial, it doesn't matter. We're a national sponsor of a charitable giving offering. We're audited and regulated by the Internal Revenue Service. As a national sponsor, we can't say, well, Chris and your spouse, you can give to these charities, but you can't give to these charities. And that's why people like it, because it's so easy to open. It's very competitively priced. The fun part is to give money to charities. It grows tax-free over time. And then eventually it's part of my succession plan. It's part of my will. It's part of my estate. One last thing, John, people also have the misnomer or the misunderstanding. Well, just rich people park money in these accounts and they don't give it away. That's not the case. So for 26 years now, because we have the stats, Schwab Charitable, Vanguard, Fidelity, every year, 20% of all our assets go to charities. In fact, last year alone, John, and all your listeners, we processed $9 billion out to charities, just us alone last year. So at Schwab Charitable, we sent $9 billion out to charities. It helped 155,000 charities. And it's very popular for the reasons I just cited.
Yeah, good note there. What I've seen with most people is if they've got money in a donor advised fund, they're actually more generous. They oftentimes feel like, okay, I've got this, I might as well give it away. And the second thing I tell you from a strategic standpoint, we have a lot of clients that try to give 3 to 5 years of giving into a donor advised fund so that they get a tax impact today, but then they can give it out longer. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, their lump sums are bigger, therefore they get more generous. So it is interesting to watch how, if you look at the trends, how this has shifted even in the last 5 years. It's been dramatic. To that point, you talk about cash and maybe some appreciated assets going in. Mm-hmm. But I've had a lot of conversations with you guys about what I might call the weirder assets, because you can do other charitable giving if you're, let's say a small business owner, you want to contribute some shares of your company, things like that. Why don't you just give us a few minutes on what else can you do with these things beyond just the normal?
Great point. So most of the time, people use publicly traded securities, stocks, ETFs, exchange traded funds. So you have assets, for instance, in taxable brokerage accounts, and then you use those assets and contribute or give it to the charity, which is Schwab Charitable. But remember, the Internal Revenue Service says, maybe my spouse and I own a private business. Maybe we have a commercial building. Maybe we own residential, even cryptocurrency, rare coins, or restricted stock. Maybe my spouse works for a non-publicly traded company. And now that she's a senior officer, for instance, she's vested in that company and she receives, let's say, restricted stock, and she starts to have the option to cash that in. So when you have these complex illiquid assets, Schwab Charitable has a team in our complex strategy team, and there's 8 attorneys on this team who have significant industry experience about the due diligence on what you just said. So for instance, most of the time, that's why I raised the point, all the real wealth in the United States, people build private businesses and they sell them. And they build private businesses and they sell them. And there's big liquidity events. And so to get out in front of that, wealth advisors like yourself and all the other wealth advisors, they tap into this complimentary service within Schwab. And we help the client understand, okay, what exactly is the asset? We're getting ready to sell our private business. S Corp, C Corp, limited liability, it doesn't matter. And all these things will own so that we can help your client. Then eventually there's a large liquidity event, and the donor, the private business owner, can take a small portion of that asset before they sell it, before they consummate it, and they can donate it to a charity, which happens to be a Schwab Charitable, which is a donor advised fund account. So while most of the assets are the traditional stocks, bonds, ETFs, or cash, the largest growing part of our business. In fact, John, we did $1 billion in complex illiquid assets last year. The sale of the private business, commercial real estate, residential real estate. If people have maybe gotten fortunate in owning private equity or hedge funds, or one of the folks in the family receives non-publicly traded stock, all these complex illiquid assets can also be part of the charitable giving equation.
Yeah, that's the part when I started going down that path that was super interesting. You can do some really cool things.
Yep.
Let's jump to the back end of that. So now you put your money in, and you talk about giving out. But what I've also seen is this has brought up broader conversations within families, because it's not just about mom and dad handing money out. So now they want to figure out, well, how do I include my children? What are you guys seeing in that space as far as engaging all family members using a donor advised fund?
Great point. So, if we take my example, so folks grew up, maybe, you have time, treasure, and talent, right? So maybe when you're younger and you start working, you get married, you raise a family, you maybe have a lot more time and maybe not as much treasure, but you have expertise. So eventually you can sit on boards, you become more philanthropic, and you involve your kids. You try to model that behavior. So I learned that behavior growing up in Wisconsin, a small town called Menasha, Wisconsin. Some of your listeners might know that.
As long as you don't say go Packers, we're good.
But when it comes to philanthropic giving, so what families do is, what's wonderful about the donor advised fund account, whether it's ours or Fidelity, is that there's all these tools and resources and best practices. So for instance, I mentioned that customized succession planning. So at a minimum, this is just like any other asset in the family with the donor, with the client. So whether it's retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, bank accounts, we instill the best practice to you, the wealth advisor. Talk to your donors, your families about if there's any money left in this account 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, be part of your will, your estate plan, etc. Most of the time, maybe kids are going to split everything. And so in our example, if there's any money, and there might be a balance left in a donor advised fund account when our estate plan is finally enacted, and 2 daughters are going to split the account. And now they'll have their own donor advised fund account in their name. There won't be an immediate tax benefit, but they're going to enjoy the same tax benefits in their lifetime as I did in my lifetime. Number 2, you can get together at 4th of July and Thanksgiving and Easter and then your mom's birthday or whatever, right? So families get together and talk about charitable planning. What are some organizations that we want to give as a family? And or, for instance, hey, Kylie, do me a favor, right? So you go up on the Schwab website, look for charities that are based in the state of California, for instance, that are trying to prevent forest fires because your aunt and uncle live in Sonoma, California. So my daughter or anybody can click, go on the website, type in certain criteria that meets a donor's mission or objective. And then third, we have tools and best practices. We have a wonderful giving guide, which really helps a family kind of further define and map out their charitable planning strategy and their succession planning, and what are the best types of charities to look at, and what kind of succession planning do we want to look at. So whether it's just $1,000 or $2,000 a year, you fund it, you give it, you fund it, you give it, or some of the larger balance accounts, the industries making sure that there's succession planning, the families get together, or it could be an individual, a widower, someone who doesn't have heirs. What's wonderful about this account, as you know, John, it's very flexible and amendable. So my spouse and I could open up an account now. We could name our 2 daughters as our eventual successors. And then maybe we actively give to 10 different charities every year. But then maybe one of those charities folds. Maybe one of those charities closes. Maybe we sour on one of the charities. And so these accounts are not set in stone. They're very pliable. They're very amendable. They're changeable from a family dynamics perspective. And it's so easy because you just go on the website. I want to send money to this charity. Schwab will do all the vetting as far as what charities are eligible. Maybe when we want to focus on international grants. So for instance, within Schwab Charitable, we have an international grants team. We have a special customizable succession team. So depending on the complexity, depending on what the family wants to do, depending on if it's individual donor, folks can get together and you can work with your family and loved ones and make a difference to the charities you want to support through this account.
So it seems like because you brought up family, what's been your journey that brought you to consult professionally about charity your whole life, basically?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I just touched on it before. So growing up in Wisconsin, right? I probably, back then again, 5 kids, wasn't all the money around, but we made sure to help folks in our community. So my mom, for instance, I was kind of prepping for this call. You need to go and shovel Mrs. Kirschling's driveway. You need to go help Mrs. Borski, right? So back in the 60s and 70s, 80s, as we all grew up, we became philanthropic. We didn't know it. We were just like, you need to go help the neighbor, right? Then as we all grow up and then we start our professional careers, then we become more involved. We accumulate maybe assets. We save for retirement. And then there's ways to give some of your treasure away, right? Or I've always been very philanthropic. I sit on 2 boards right now. And whether it's helping out at a faith-based organization, then you try to model that behavior with our kids and our girls. So for instance, raising our 2 girls in Naperville, Illinois, they went to a public high school, and the particular public high school in Naperville, Illinois, they really encouraged kids to be philanthropic, and you were supposed to get 50 hours of community service before you graduated from high school, and it looks really good on a college transcript. And now both my daughters, they both live on the Northeast coast. As adults, they're philanthropic. And then third, what I really love about this job is that I've always worked in financial services, but this particular role helps me in that it's taking advantage of all my institutional wealth management experience and working with folks like yourself. But then also I work with the charitable division inside of Schwab. And then I'm helping clients hopefully give a little bit more to charities tax smart efficiently. You can always still use credit cards and tithe money to a church. But as families and individuals start to look at selling assets as they get older, why would you pay 20% long-term capital gains tax when you can, for instance, when the girls were little, we went to Disney World all the time, John, right? And I told my wife, I'm going to buy Disney stock. And now all of a sudden I wake up 30 years later and we've done pretty good on Disney stock. So I could, for instance, sell 10 shares of Disney stock, take the after-tax proceeds, and then make that donation of cash to the donor advised fund account, and then start using it to give to the charities. But instead, just take the 10 shares of Disney stock and donate it to my donor advised fund account. And then, as you know, John, next spring, when we file our taxes, I don't pay a penny of capital gains tax on any of those stocks or mutual funds or cash that are donated to the donor advised fund account. So I've always been very philanthropic. And now we're in a position where I take advantage of tax smart philanthropy, and I advocate, and I'm that charitable consultant within Schwab, and I work with all the independent wealth advisors in the Midwest. And it's a great job, and it's the best one I'll ever have.
So you bring up something interesting. I'm going to start with a comment and then jump into this. What we've seen is more and more people don't want to just die with the money. And in fact, most people that retire 30 years later probably have just as much money when they die as they did when they started retirement. It doesn't seem that way, but that's what happens. Mm-hmm. And so they have to start figuring out, how do I leave a legacy? So it's either giving to my kids or giving to charity. And they end up wanting to oftentimes give more to charity along the way. Even Warren Buffett is giving more to charity. So everyone's doing it. But you said something interesting. You said you sit on boards of nonprofits, and I do too. Let's jump to that side of the fence. What are nonprofits missing? Because every time I go to a event, I was at one last week, they never on their form of asking for more money are saying, do you have a donor advised fund? Would you be willing to give from your donor advised fund? And I watched a bunch of people at my table write on their little card, I have a donor advised fund. I'll give you from that. Sounds great, but they never follow up and say, oh, since you have that, can you give even more? So what are charities missing on the back end here?
Yeah, so great question. So there's about 1.6 million charities in the U.S. So 501c3 tax-exempt organizations, the American Red Cross, St. Jude Medical, Doctors Without Borders, some of the medium-sized charities, food pantries in your community, my community. So thankfully, luckily, over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, more and more charities, more and more tax-exempt organizations are including a tab on their corporate website. People who sit on the boards have financial service experience. So over the last 5 or 10 years, but there's still a lot of improvement that can be made. There are a lot more charities that have become familiar with the features and the benefits of a charitable giving account, which is known as a donor advised fund account. But there's still a lot of charities that don't. And so, for instance, we work with Stanford University and that National Center of Family Philanthropy. We created a wonderful resource. In fact, we have on our website, John, and for all your listeners, we have a special section just devoted to charities. Best practices, marketing collateral, testimonials from donors and clients and advisors that focuses on the business efficacy of, okay, I'm running a small charity. And I want to take advantage. I get checks from clients once in a while, and it's from a donor advised fund sponsor. I'd like to understand more about it. So up on our website, we created a wonderful tool. It's our nonprofit fundraising toolkit, 8 actionable ideas. And a couple of them are what you just said. Number 1, up on your website, just have a button that says, donor advised fund account 101. Like, what is it and how do people use it? And that could be one of the ways that charities receive money from donors. Number two, things like when you do receive grants and gifts from donors through a donor advised fund, acknowledge that, because then, like myself or you, I have lunch, I have coffee, I have some group that I hang around with. Maybe I am in a men's group of a local faith-based organization. I'll say to my buddies on Sunday morning, yeah, you know what? I gave $100 to that church that we belong to through my donor advised fund account. And all the guys sitting at the table recognize that. So, and then third, things like when organizations do campaigns, or maybe they're raising money to add an addition to their wing, or so when they're proactively marketing to the different donors and prospects and clients, put a sentence or two in your annual appeal, on your newsletter, up on your website. It makes a difference, because a lot of clients don't realize that that local little German cultural center that I sit on the board with in Chicago, I've been advocating for 3 years. And so now my executive director and all the other board members know what a donor advised fund account, and it's been included on our website. But there's still a lot of education. There's still a lot of improvement. So whether it's you as a wealth advisor, us as a national sponsor, we get the word out. People are better now, but there's a lot of ways to improve it going forward.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because when you said that, I thought there's so many charities and boards that I've sat on where they don't know exactly how to approach this topic, and this topic's becoming bigger.
Agree.
So as we wrap up, what am I missing? Like what haven't I asked you that we should all know about charitable giving or the donor advised fund or trends or whatever else?
Yeah, no, I think we touched on the main points. I think when you look at, where's the puck headed, right, over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. So first of all, like I mentioned before, hundreds of billions of dollars is moving from grandpa and grandma, baby boomers to millennials, X, Y, and Z. And it's already in the charitable giving space. So whether it's a private foundation, assets at an endowment, a donor advised fund account, trust, charitable remainder trust, whatever the vehicle is, as you know, John, once it's irrevocably given or funded, you really can't undo that. So a lot of wealth advisors are becoming more educated, and a lot of retail clients are looking at the main features and benefits of a charitable giving account, but we're agnostic. We're just trying to increase giving in the U.S. Number two, I would encourage all your listeners to go to the Schwab website or the Vanguard website or the bank website, because there's a plethora of marketing and collateral and best practices. And what's cool about the things I mentioned today is you don't have to have your donor advised fund account with us to tap into these resources, to read about how my family and I can do a better job, maybe to start taking advantage of a donor advised fund account. I mentioned where a lot of families know about some charities that maybe my spouse and I want to give to, maybe my 2 adult daughters, but a lot of clients, once they fund these accounts, want to find new charities. So up on our website, for instance, we've taken the leading third-party charity evaluators. So a lot of your listeners know, like Charity Navigator and give.org and give.well. So up on our corporate website, up on schwabcharitable.org, we've taken the leading third-party charity evaluators. They give all the charities in the U.S. They give them, gold stars, and they give them ratings, and they make sure that the money that the organization is making a difference to the mission. So you can go up on our website, look for charities that meet a certain criteria, a certain objective. It spits out 2 or 3 different charities. You set those aside, and then we can get together as a family. We can get together as a donor, do our further due diligence, and then maybe start making grants to those charities. And then third, complex illiquid assets, right? A burgeoning part of our business. We have 8 attorneys in our complex asset team. So the sale of the private business, cryptocurrency, restricted stock, commercial real estate. And then fourth, just, what's nice about the donor advised fund account, it's additive. It doesn't replace. It can supplement. I can still use a credit card once in a while. Maybe I tithe to my church and I just have an auto debit to my checking account to the church. But what's nice about the donor advised fund account is more and more clients and more of your listeners have done well in financial markets And why not take advantage of tax-smart philanthropy? And one of the vehicles and why it's so compelling and why it's so popular are the features and benefits of a charitable giving account, also known as donor advised fund account. And I'm always available, but it's been a pleasure this morning. And we greatly appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. Since you've mentioned it several times, I'd encourage people listening to go to Schwab's site. It's dafgiving360.org.
Yes.
And it's a fabulous site. I've sent many people there for education. And once in a while, quite honestly, me or my team will jump on and look at stuff too. So I love that site. So thank you, Chris, for joining us. And for all of you out there, if you want to get in touch with us here at BGM, go to bgm360.com and you can see everything you want and chat with me if you want. Other than that, please like or share if you like this podcast. And everyone have a great day.